Greetings, today we will assess the outcome of a potential conflict between France and Algeria, 60 years after the two fought a brutal 8-year war in which Algeria won its independence. This assessment comes almost 10 years after France spearheaded a joint European assault against neighbouring Libya in 2011, the consequences of which continue to seriously affect much of Africa today. Due to the geographical separation of the two countries and the nature of assets deployed, the conflict is expected to center around air engagements and exchange of missile attacks. It will be assumed that, short of an existential threat to their survival, neither party will use weapons of mass destruction. Assessing French capabilities, the French Air Force fields only two classes of frontline combat jet, neither of which are particularly heavy. The lightweight Mirage 2000, roughly equivalent to but smaller and less powerful than the American F-16C Fighting Falcon, and the slightly heavier lower medium weight Rafale, roughly equivalent to but also lighter than the American F-18C Hornet. France does deploy a small number of American support aircraft, most notably 4 E-3F Sentries in the Air Force and 3 E-2C Hawkeyes in the Navy. These carry large and sophisticated radars which help compensate for the relatively small radars carried by French fighters. Overall, France's armed forces field 9 Rafale squadrons and 7 Mirage squadrons for a total of 162 Rafales and 108 Mirages. Each icon represents approximately 20 fighters. France's emphasis on domestic procurement but limited domestic capacities means neither fighter is particularly outstanding compared to those produced by larger manufacturers. Looking to Algeria, the Algerian Air Force deploys 4 major classes of fighters in 8 squadrons, including the heavyweight Su-30 Mka flanker and the medium-weight MiG-29C Fulcrum, enhanced derivatives of the Soviet Union's 2 primary frontline fighters. Algeria also deploys the MiG-25 Foxbat Heavy Interceptor, the fastest and highest flying combat jet in the world. Algerian Foxbats have integrated modern 4th-generation avionics and radars. The Su-24M Fencer strike fighter is also deployed in considerable numbers and is specialized in air-to-ground and anti-shipping roles. The Algerian fleet is thus comprised of 48 Su-30s, 15 MiG-25s, 23 MiG-29s and 37 Su-24s fielded in 3, 1, 4 and 2 squadrons respectively. Each icon represents approximately 10 fighters. It is notable when comparing the two fleets that Algeria's lightest fighter is actually a lot faster, heavier and more maneuverable than France's heaviest fighter, and has an overall better flight performance with a higher climb rate and operational altitude. While the Rafale's radar is more powerful, its air-to-air engagement range is shorter. Comparing the two major frontline fighters, the Algerian Su-30 Mka can accommodate radars over twice as large as those on the Rafale, providing a major advantage in situational awareness. Neither aircraft are particularly stealthy and both will detect the other well beyond engagement range. Some newer variants of the Rafale, which have begun to deploy more advanced AESA radars, can boast situational awareness more on par with the Su-30. These radars compensate for their small size, with greater sophistication and are more difficult to jam than older passive radars. The Rafale's speed is well below average and its maneuverability is also relatively low. The Su-30 is among the world's fastest and most maneuverable fighters, and its thrust-vectoring engines are 65% more powerful. The fact that Algerian jets can fly a lot higher and faster than their French counterparts provides major advantages. Higher and faster aircraft give missiles more energy and thus a greater chance of hitting a target upon launch, as well as a much longer range. Fast and high-flying aircraft also require more energy to hit, which improves their survivability against enemy missile attacks. Shown here, for example, a slow and low-flying F-16 would have a much higher chance of hitting a jet flying 10 km higher than it, such as the Rafale, than it would against one flying 20 km higher, such as the Foxbat. A higher flying F-22 would have a much better chance of targeting both aircraft. French reliance on the Mika air-to-air missile is a major shortcoming, with the missile retaining a range of just 80 km and a mediocre flight performance, compared to its American and Russian analogues. The Mika is relied on by the entire French fleet. Algerian jets have access to the R-77 and the R-27ER, which provide several advantages in beyond visual range engagements. To assess the outcome of an air war, it's also important to consider both countries' air defense and strike capabilities. Algeria does not announce most of its arms purchases, and its deployment of many advanced systems has been known only through leaked footage. The Panzer SM, which was not known to have been offered for export at all, is a classic example appearing in Algeria in 2019. The platform is currently in service alongside the original Panzer S. Algeria's air defense network is thought to otherwise be comprised of S-400 and S-300 PMU-2 long-range systems, Buk M2 medium-range systems, and S-125 short-range systems. The S-400 in particular was designed to combat high-end stealth aircraft such as the American F-22 and can engage them at high hypersonic speeds, meaning much lower performance Rafale and Mirage jets will be extremely vulnerable. The platform fields over half a dozen classes of surface-to-air missile and can intercept up to 80 targets simultaneously, including aircraft, cruise missiles, and tactical ballistic missiles. If equipped with the 40 N6E hypersonic Mach 14 missile, its engagement range will increase to 400 kilometers. Complemented by the Buk M2, Panzer SM, and other high-end systems, the network they will form will be extremely difficult to penetrate. This will further be complemented by interceptor aircraft and S-300 batteries. With a far more offensively oriented military, France's air defences remain far more limited, with 3 units of Crotale and a single unit of Aster missiles able to provide point defence for high-value targets such as air bases and nuclear facilities. France's lack of multi-layered air defences, the limited numbers of targets French air defences can engage, and the limited ranges of which they can do so leaves them highly vulnerable to being eliminated by standoff cruise missile attacks. France's poor air defense capabilities will place more strain on its fighters to protect the country's airspace, which with combat readiness rates for its aircraft low could prove devastating in a war's initial stages. France is capable of deploying more Aster missiles from its 2 Horizon-class destroyers. The air defense capabilities of French warships, however, remain extremely limited compared to their modern American, Chinese, and Russian counterparts. The French surface fleet's ability to operate in the Mediterranean Sea remains questionable, given the advanced submarine and ground-based anti-ship capabilities in Algerian service. Algerian advanced Kilo-class submarines are very hard to detect, and deploy caliber cruise missiles which are extremely difficult to intercept. The longer-range ground-based CX-1 is also very fast and dangerous. Arguably, Algeria's most dangerous anti-ship weapon is the Iskander-E hypersonic ballistic missile, which is well beyond the capabilities of any French warship to intercept, and has a 500-kilometer range. Algeria is the world's largest foreign operator of the Iskander. The Air Force is also well equipped for long-range ship hunting missions. With France's offensive options in the Mediterranean limited, the Navy may look to launch operations from the Atlantic. France's Mistral carriers can deploy helicopters for anti-submarine warfare operations in the Atlantic, using the Strait of Gibraltar as a choke point, while the heavier carrier Charles de Gaulle and Rafale M squadrons may attempt to strike Algeria under this protection. Land-based Rafales may also seek to strike from this direction, using aerial refueling to extend their ranges. Algeria would likely respond by deploying air defences, fighter jets, and potentially with retaliatory strikes on French carrier groups with its Su-30s. These fighters can deploy KH-31A anti-ship cruise missiles from standoff ranges, which are very fast and maneuverable and follow sea-skimming trajectories. While France lacks comparable cruise missiles to the Caliber and CX-1, its submarines and cruise missiles between them will likely be sufficient to deny Algerian surface ships access to the Mediterranean. French submarines are smaller but noisier than their Algerian counterparts. Submarines and fighters both deploy the aging subsonic Exocet missile, which though slow and carrying a small warhead can be dangerous in large numbers. Algerian surface ships are on average more modern than their French counterparts, but are lighter and fewer in number. Like French warships, Algerian ships deploy only a single class of surface-to-air missile with relatively short ranges and are vulnerable to being overwhelmed by cruise missile attacks. The Mediterranean will thus likely be an effective no-man's land for surface ships from both sides. With neither party likely to gain complete control over the skies over the Mediterranean, anti-submarine warfare efforts will also be restricted, with helicopters of both sides vulnerable to targeting from the air. Neither Algeria nor France deploys land-based tactical cruise or ballistic missiles capable of striking the other's homeland, leaving attacks solely to fighter jets. Fighters retain a number of assets for standoff attacks, most notably the Scalp cruise missile, which has a 560-kilometer range. The multiple layers in Algeria's air defense network, however, is likely to seriously limit the effectiveness of these missiles. Algerian fighters deploy the 200-kilometer range Kh-59M and the much faster Mach 3.5 Kh-31P cruise missiles. While French air defenses are relatively poor, the shorter ranges of these missiles will make delivery more risky and likely involve clashes with French fighters. Algeria retains a considerable advantage when delivering missile attacks against French targets due to the higher altitudes and faster speeds at which its aircraft can launch cruise missiles. This allows missiles to strike targets which are further away. Algeria's air force has the advantage of far higher combat readiness rates, meaning more of its fleet is combat ready at any time. Combat readiness rates in Western Europe are generally low. Given France's lack of air defenses, this will provide Algeria with an opportunity to take out air bases and possibly to neutralize fighters on the ground in the war's early stages. Should it fail to do so in the war's opening 2 to 3 weeks, Algeria's fighter fleet may find itself increasingly outnumbered as more French fighters are brought into service. Ultimately, Algeria has a defensive rather than a power projection-oriented force and lacks the assets needed to invade faraway territories. France has a heavily offensive and power projection-oriented force with assets such as carriers, assault ships, and heavy aerial tankers intended to deliver attacks against faraway targets. In a conflict with Algeria, however, it will struggle to gain control over the Mediterranean seas and skies needed to assault Algerian territory. Even if it did somehow manage to deploy troops to the African coast, a French landing force without control of the skies will very likely be instantly repelled by what are arguably the most modern and highly trained ground forces in Africa. The result of a war will most likely be a stalemate, meaning a successful Algerian defense, given that Algeria never had power projection assets needed to attempt a cross-water invasion in the first place. The ability to neutralize targets across the French mainland and deny France any offensive options can be equated with an Algerian victory. Looking to the future, a greater proportion of French fighters are set to integrate AESA radars and Meteor missiles, which will bridge the gap in air-to-air capabilities with Algeria's Su-30 Mka and provide much longer detection and engagement ranges. Algerian flankers are likely to themselves be upgraded, with Russia offering to integrate Airbus E radars and AL-41 engines from the Su-35, which would provide a serious boost to their capabilities and allow them to integrate R-37M air-to-air missiles. The R-37M has a longer range and is faster than the Meteor. Algeria is likely to continue to invest heavily in new air defenses, including more Panzer SM and S-400 batteries and new S-350 systems. Purchases of new fighters are also expected. The Su-34 would provide an improved long-range strike capability, particularly if equipped with new Kh-65 and Kh-101 cruise missiles. The Kh-101 has advanced radar evading capabilities and would allow Algerian jets to strike targets across Europe without leaving their own airspace. Algeria may also be a leading client for the Su-57 next-generation fighter, a game-changer even if acquired in small numbers, with capabilities far ahead of any jets serving in Africa or Europe.